Okay, I think we'll get started right away. It's our privilege here at the Frost School of Music to not only do this opera Jackie O, but to have Michael Daugherty, a distinguished professor at the University of Michigan, to come down and join us, and also Wayne Koestenbaum, a distinguished professor at City University of New York at the Graduate Center. And Michael came down here on Tuesday and was with us in the cast for 2 dress rehearsals. And Wayne came down yesterday and saw last night's dress rehearsal with our other cast, which will be performing for about 400 school students tomorrow morning here in Gusman. And that same cast will also perform on Saturday night. And then this cast that you saw will perform again at our final performance at 3 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. And it's my privilege to welcome my colleague here, whose specialty here at the School of Music and Musicology is opera. This is Dr. Karen Henson.
Hi. Can you hear me? I'm a historian of opera. That sounds very serious. I'm not too serious. And I want to sort of MC things a little bit just to start off, and then we're going to open up the floor to the audience. For those who don't know, what I want to try and do is put a few things in a larger sort of setting. Professor Koestenbaum is very well known among those of us who work on opera for being a great lover of opera, a very influential writer on opera, as well as a poet and an English professor. And I wanted to start out by asking him a question, which is, it's a sort of 2-part question. First of all, if you could tell us a little bit about how he came to write the libretto. It obviously dates only shortly after Jackie Kennedy's death, so that's something I think would be interesting. But also, the libretto, which is the text of the opera, in case you hadn't realized, and I'm sure you had, has all kinds of references to the operatic tradition. And in particular to this long, long tradition in opera of very powerful heroines, some of them based on real-life figures, particularly in the Italian operatic tradition. And by making those references, Wayne, if I may call you Wayne, is clearly aligning Jackie Kennedy Onassis with that tradition of heroines and all the other amazing female characters in this opera. So I wondered if you could tell us a little more about that. Thank you.
Is this on? Yeah. Yes, it is. Thank you for that great question, and what a wonderful performance this was, so moving. After having been steeped in opera for so long, and having been steeped as a fan and stargazer in the image of Jackie Onassis, I felt it was time to take, in a way, the capital that had amassed around female magnificence in the operatic tradition, and in a way on female interiority, suffering, introspection, all the 400 years tradition of our understanding of what it's like to identify with magnificent, if tragic, women on stage, to take that and graft it on to maybe the most vivid, popular, contemporary epitome of those kinds of elevated, yet opaque emotions, and to just kind of graft the two together as simply as possible. The opera's always come about through commissions, so the opera was commissioned by the Houston Grand Opera. They approached Michael. Michael approached me. I had written a book about Jackie Onassis, etc. But it was, it was really an attempt to bring the allure of contemporary celebrity into the bloodstream of operatic embodiment.
Right, and this is an interesting moment, right? This year we had an opera about Anna Nicole Smith. We probably need an opera about Princess Diana sometime soon if it doesn't exist already. So this is a rich subject area. So if we turn to the composer, could you tell us something about what it means to give a voice to these women who actually existed, and some of them had really extraordinary and distinctive voices. And I should say, by the way, as Professor Koestenbaum Wayne says, well, congratulations to the cast. I probably should have taken a moment at this point, and thank you all for your wonderful voices and your wonderful... And your wonderful physical expression as well.
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, you know, when you think of the voice, what is the voice? I mean, is the voice Sammy Davis Jr., Dean Martin? Is the voice Maria Callas? Is the voice someone who just speaks? So I wanted to take the idea of voice and to move beyond just opera and move beyond just pop music and find some way to graft these things together, just like Wayne was talking about. It was a very radical opera 20 years ago to even have a number like 1968 at the Houston Grand Opera. You just didn't do those kind of things. Now, there was a time when to be very avant-garde or modern, that composers would write music that was very atonal. There was no melodies. That was a particular time in the 50s and the 60s. But in the 90s, when we wrote this, to be avant-garde was to actually write a tune, you see. And it took a lot of guts actually to write this opera. We pushed a lot of buttons. What's interesting is that the opera, actually like a bottle of wine, actually gets better with age. I think every time I hear it, I think, wow, it's just such a great thing. The text is amazing. Every time I look at the text or hear it, I mean, what Wayne wrote inspired me to come up with some great tunes. And also, what's interesting about the opera, there's that motive, the Jackie's theme, which you hear the cello play at the beginning, dee-da, dee-da, and that goes throughout the entire opera. Sometimes it's in a pop music vein, sometimes in an opera vein, sometimes in a very dark vein. There's also the telephone, which keeps coming back, which was brilliant. This idea of the telephone, they keep picking up the phone throughout the opera. There's some cluster chords that I use, and that phone keeps coming back. And every time they pick up the phone, you never know what's going to happen. Sometimes Jackie's coming, sometimes someone's been killed or whatever. But it's brilliant how the phone was used, and Jackie, of course, calls Jack at the end. And so all these elements were used in the opera, and it was just a joy to write it.
Can I ask you just briefly, I know that I'm asking everybody two questions, but what did opera do for you? Because when I read your biography, you're known, of course, for a mixture of sort of jazz influence, popular compositional style, but also you had a very modernist training. But in your biography, your sort of official biography, it talks about how Jackie O represents this moment where you became more lyrical and moved in a new kind of direction. Did this experience of writing this opera have that kind of effect on your compositional career?
I think the opportunity to write this really was, for me, a big step, to try some new ideas out. What about you, Wayne? What about?
Well, as a poet and essayist, everything happens privately and in my room or on the page, and to actually be in the flesh with other people and see these gifted people embody things. I mean, to actually enter an experience that is in time and space and is really unfolding is incredibly moving. And it's really like space travel. And to think that literally 20 years ago, it's 20 years since Jackie died. No, it's more than, it's 25 years since she died. It's 20 years since, I can't count. All I know, it was a long time ago in 1997 when we first heard somebody impersonate Jackie Kennedy Onassis, and to hear you do this tonight with such presence and beauty and mobility of feature, as it's like a 20, I can feel kind of cathedral of time form around us all. So it's a really incredible.
Every time he talks, he comes up with some great lines. The cathedral of time. I want to hear about the visuals, or the stage direction, and what you guys did. Can you talk a little bit? I want to make sure, because we don't.
Of course, absolutely.
What would you like to know?
Well, I thought it was fantastic. I loved the images you did, and I loved how at the beginning Jackie goes forward as she's looking, and then it starts to go backwards. I thought that was brilliant, brilliant.
Well, when Alan asked me to direct the production, he said, I'd like to make it a multimedia production. It seemed like the material calls for that, and I had to agree. He also said that he had worked with Laurie, who I had not yet worked with, and I said, great, let's try that out. And we had a conversation right off the bat and began to talk about ideas. And it was important for me that we modulate the visuals carefully so that we didn't overwhelm, but we provided some sort of context. Especially at the very beginning, I felt like 20 years after the opera, 20 plus years after her death, having talked with some of the younger people that I have some contact with. They're not quite sure who this character was, so I thought it was important to provide some context, some historical context at the beginning, and also at the end, after she comes back to America and led such a rich life in our culture, both in the larger culture as well as her own personal life. So then we began to discuss various ideas about what might be appropriate for this or that or whatever, and when do we want to pull back from the projections, when do we want to move forward with something more aggressive and more visually engaging. And it was just a lot of back and forth and trying to figure that out. Do you want to add anything to that?
It's been a pleasure working on this piece, particularly with, because I worked mostly with you, Ben. But it was also just a great opportunity to see this incredible treasure trove of photographs that are of this era and of Jackie O and Kennedy. And Maria Callas. It's amazing how many beautiful pictures there are of these people. It was hard to decide between all these amazing pictures. And I also wanted to thank Andy Warhol, particularly, whose work I used extensively through this piece, as well as all the photographers that took these amazing pictures. So thank you to them. And yeah, that was my experience.
I have
yeah.
one question. Can you explain why you did the hand movements for the singers in some of the works?
That was an intuitive choice that I felt was right, and I couldn't explain exactly why. I could get some sense of what it resonated, how it resonated for me, but it felt like I wanted to include in the piece, especially at the end of the first act, where the music goes into something very different than we've heard before. And part of this whole piece and part of the set design and the projections was the issue of fragmentation and how this piece was gratefully broken up into sections and how that helps the storytelling rather than having a linear narrative, a conventional opera biography. By breaking it up, I thought that was really important. And at the very end then, when we go at the end of the first act, when we go into that piece that has this very haunting and odd minimalist quality to it, it felt like now we're in a different place, that Jackie has made her decision to go away with Onassis, and we're in a different place, and it was time for something that was more stylized, less naturalistic, and a quality to the movement that just felt right to me. And once we had that, then I started to put it into other places so that it became some sort of continuity to it. So that's how that came about. And I know that Wayne and I were speaking this morning about the meaning of what it might be. Movement sometimes has meaning, sometimes it doesn't have meaning, sometimes it doesn't have meaning, but you bring meaning to it. And perhaps you all had certain observations or questions about that. I'm sure you had your own interpretation of it.
I just want to say about the hands, it allowed each member of the chorus, as Michael's music allows each member of the chorus to have a very individual identity, so that each, it was an extraordinarily individuating move on the, and I think the chorus, you were also great. I don't even want to call you chorus.
We use the term ensemble, but
we'd like to open it up to questions. Now, I should say, by the way, in case you haven't realized, this is the director of the opera, Ben Krywosz, who is known very much for his work with acting and movement as well as song. And this is Laurie Olinder, who did the projections. So
I also want to mention Ann Kite. I'm not sure if Ann is in the audience still. She was yeah, there you go. Just a wonderful resource in helping me and working with the ensemble and all of the performers for various kind of movement sequences. And we're very grateful for that contribution.
yes, some really wonderful dancing. So do we have questions?
There was one picture of John at the end, and I think there was a Carolyn earlier. There was a larger of Carolyn getting was at a graduation, but the timing was not right. I had to get rid of a slide, and she left. But no, there was not a specific reason. I was focusing on Jackie O. Yeah.
I should say that the libretto does make a reference to the children at the very end, that how much she wanted to protect her children and how much she
I
missed them.
should say, I'm so glad that Jackie died before her son was killed. She could have never have endured that. That would have been way too much. Way too much.
And I should, yes, please say a word.
That sounds threatening.
Yes, absolutely. I've just been asked by a very, very gifted singer, to a really extraordinary mezzo, to explain why there are all those names of mixed drinks, and what it means is that Michael wanted a drinking song. I gave him a drinking song, and it would be that every drink listed, they're all real drinks, had a symbolic relation to something having to do with Jackie, whether it's Ich bin because of I Am a Berliner, her husband, or Union Jack, or Queen Elizabeth, or they all are little allegories of Jackie. And she hears it. She says, are they telling the story of my life? And she pipes up and says, Jack, when she hears Union Jack.
I realized they were in alphabetical order.
And they're in alphabetical order.
It's also a kind of catalogue aria, right? In the Mozart tradition. Another question? We can also. Yes.
I would like to know, it's obviously a very American opera, European. How was it received in Europe, and is there any future for that opera? Because I discovered it tonight, and I'm really so non cul, as we say in French, no translation needed. What is happening with that opera now in Europe?
Sure. It's been done in France, in Metz, and it's been done 3 times in Italy by 3 different opera companies, and it's a huge hit in Europe. I think because that particular time period, I think resonates with many people. And Jackie was beloved, and Andy Warhol. These are all symbols of America, and JFK, Aristotle, and so forth. So it's been a big hit. When it was done in Italy, they sang it in English, if you can imagine, But they go. I mean, what was great about the party scene with the choristers is that they had a guy dressed like Elvis. Yeah. Oh, they just loved it. They were crazy about the opera over there. Yeah. But I must say that it's a very different opera. I mean, probably in Europe this would be considered more of a pop opera like West Side Story, probably, because in Europe most of the composers still write like Alpenberg or Schoenberg or this kind of thing, the kind of old style from the 1920s, 30s. They still do that, a lot. So, but this opera has legs. It keeps being produced, and I'm, excited about it.
Just before another audience question, I just want to give an opportunity for one of the singers to speak. I wanted to ask if India a question about her experience singing the lead role and how it feels to recreate someone who was so alive and so iconic and so important. And then we'll get to the question over there. Sorry, I haven't forgotten you, the gentleman over there.
Well, it was kind of intimidating because she's a real person. She had such recognition. Her image is just imprinted in all of our minds. The first thing, I was so grateful to be cast. I thank Alan Johnson for his faith in me and encouragement. And then I thought, oh my God, I don't look like Jackie at all. But it was really fascinating getting to know Jackie, and I feel like I know Jackie, and I'm gonna miss her. It was really fascinating to read Wayne's book. It's a wonderful book. I recommend it, Jackie Under My Skin. And it is a journey, and every piece is so different and interesting, and it was so comfortable to sing. Thank you for that. But the research on her, it was just very sobering that she endured the unspeakable and carried on. I think that's great.
You did a great job tonight. So We're very grateful. Yes, there's a question over there.
Express my appreciation to the reference to the violent endings that take place at the thrown out statement that, our country grown and the people all the people in 63 or 68 and all so I appreciate that was written in and that was a part of all of this. Wait, can you, thank you. So your comment was about that you appreciate that there's references to, it was a time, it was a turmoil, a time of turmoil. And there's an interesting line that Aristotle says about there's something spooky about suns. Can you just say, Wayne, you were going to talk about that this happened before.
Oh yeah, I was very shaken hearing that line. Actually, last night there's something spooky about suns because of course we wrote this before John Kennedy Jr. was killed in a plane crash. And it's just like a historical coincidence, and it's sad.
Okay, this I think will have to be our last one.
Did you reference the song Get Ready, and did you reference James Bond theme?
Yes, yes. I played, it's authentic for me to do that because I grew up playing the Motown tunes when I was a kid. Dee 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 da da, let's get ready. Right, our band used to play that tune. And the James Bond, I was always a huge fan of the James Bond theme music. So there is one part where in the Smash's camera, I orchestrated like a James Bond film. There's tons of things in the film. There's a Rat Pack. I mean, there's I Am Curious Yellow is kind of like a Dean Martin number. I reference opera. There's all sorts of things. But I think what I try to do is to make it uniquely my own voice. And just like in Gustav Mahler, you have one movement that's a Landler or a waltz, and then another movement that's very tragic, and then a march or Charles Ives or whatever. So it's really maybe the individual numbers might seem straightforward, but when you juxtapose them against the other numbers, that's when it becomes jarring. And that's where the modern element comes in, I think. So.
We actually have one more question here.
Could you explain the reference to ISIS and Egyptian time?
I'd love to. Okay.
Good question.
Egyptian
I wondered about that.
Time, when Jackie Onassis was an editor at Doubleday, I believe, or at Viking, she edited a book called Egyptian Time. So when she says, I have been thinking about Egyptian time, you could take it, that's actually a factual statement. Jackie Onassis thought about the book Egyptian Time and the concept, but also because Elizabeth Taylor, who in the fan magazines in the early 60s was often juxtaposed with Jackie as like bad Liz, good Jackie. Tons of pictures of them juxtaposed. Particularly Liz was bad when she was in Cleopatra. And she says in Cleopatra in 1963, I am Isis, I am worshipped by millions who believe, whatever the lines, who believe her. And so the whole thing about do you believe in gods or goddesses or images comes in a way from Liz Taylor's mouth. So that's the Egypt, but also because time in this opera and in Jackie's life is so spooky and repeating and all the hieroglyphic aspects of Egyptian time are real.
I should say, I don't know how much time we have left, but I should say that there are clips up on YouTube of the opera. So if you just type in Jackie O, you'll see different, and there is a DVD that was done in Italy, which you can get at Amazon.com of the entire opera. So, and there's a recording that was out of print on Argo, but it is on Amazon as well. So there's different ways you can re-experience this if you so wish.
Well, it was an extraordinary experience to have the composer and the librettist and the director and the production designer all here, but also to have this wonderful performance and to have you all share it. So thank you very much.